Good morning, good afternoon, welcome everybody, good evening, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. Welcome to a webinar of the ASI. We have these webinars every 6 weeks. If you're new, you're welcome. Every other 6 weeks, generally, we have a conversation among ourselves to partly digest and see what's new within ourselves as we kind of contemplate the material that comes up when we have presenter meetings. And today is a presenter meeting. I'm delighted that we have Victoria Santos to speak with us. Victoria is one of those names that kind of, you know, when somebody comes into your orbit and oh, there she is again. Oh, there she is again. Oh, there she is again. You know, that kind of thing. She's one of those that's been happening to me for the last 6 months or so. And so I'm going to read her biog in order to do her justice. Victoria's work is rooted in a far-reaching vision of human potential. She has a deep commitment to our collective liberation. She's always curious about people's unique intersectionalities, their relationships to power and opportunity, and the ways that our stories and lives can't be contained in single categories. Victoria has trained in the fields of psychology, conflict resolution, meditation, rituals, and embodied practices. She brings over 30 years of experience and leadership in education, community organizing, and community development. With a master's degree from SUNY in Albany in political science and Latin American and Caribbean studies, she also holds certificates in transformative and healing practices and has participated in many continuing education trainings. She leads groups and individuals in meditative explorations drawn from the realization process as developed by Judith Blackstone. This process is a body-centered approach to personal and spiritual healing and maturity. For 10 years, Victoria assisted Sobonfu Some in leading grief rituals according to the Dagara traditions of Burkina Faso. The values and spirit of both of these approaches inform Victoria's work with groups. Working with Sobonfu, Victoria became increasingly interested in healing trauma. She studied multiple approaches to facilitating healing, incorporating somatic awareness and meditative practices, and she weaves together diverse healing opportunities in her work with groups and individuals. And so her breadth is far-reaching. And today we're going to speak about racism, about multiculturalism, and as usual, our format will be that Victoria will open. She will begin with some slides and she'll take it away from there, and we will have a discussion, probably using a hands up because I see we're over 30 people. So we will have a discussion where you can raise your hand. You'll see the button in the reactions, or if you have an older version of Zoom, it'll be in the participants pop-up menu. So raise your hand and we'll get to you. And so, Victoria, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jack, for that introduction. I feel so honored to be here with all of you, and I want to thank Rick for also introducing me to Jack and introducing me to this community. I want to start out by sharing a little bit about my my history and my ancestry. And let's see, there we go. See, let me make this whole screen, and then we can go from there. So the title of this conversation today is called The Spiritual Power of Being an Anti-Racist. And I'm gonna go and unpack this, and I will invite you also to unpack it with me. But first I wanna share that my view, where I start this from, is that life is a journey of learning, healing, and awareness that's evolving towards our collective liberation. And that also my liberation is tied to your liberation. I know that I'm not the first one to say that, but I'm really, as I live my life every day, I'm moving and really getting a felt sense of what that really means. I was born in an island called Hispaniola. It's actually the original name, which is from the Taino name of the indigenous people there, was Quisqueya. And this island is shared by the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So you can see Cuba is on the left up there. And it's an island that was colonized by the Spaniards and by the French. And this is the center of my little town. It's called Cruz Verde. And Cruz Verde means green cross because you don't see the other road, but it's kind of two roads traveling kind of parallel in some way, and they meet at the center in Cruz Verde. And someone was traveling, going up to another area, to the capital, and they got tired of walking, and they settled in this little spot, and they marked it with a cross, with a cross, and they painted green. So everybody that would travel, they would always use the point of, you're going to stop at the green cross. Eventually, a whole town grew around it. And my grandmother and my great-grandfather were kind of the founders of this little town. These are some of the houses. They were made out of the palm trees. And these are the slats from the palm trees. And the roofs are now mostly metal, but back then it used to be made out of palms. This is a sugar producing area. The Spaniards and the Haitian both established sugar growing fields and sugar villages in both Dominican Republic and Haiti as part of their slave route. They would produce the sugar there, and then they would take it up to Europe. And so my family grew up and congregated and lived in this region. These are some of the distant community members. And as you can see, when we think about where were most of the people from that were stolen from Africa, where did they mostly settle? They actually mostly settled and were settled in South America, around Brazil and up in that region, and then also in the Caribbean. This is my grandmother, and her name is Eloisa. As you can see, I don't know if you can get this from the picture, but I definitely get it, that she was a very strong woman. She was in there with her pipe, she just picked up the stick from the fire and is lighting her pipe. And so I really want to honor and acknowledge that my ancestors are the reason why I'm here today. This it's actually they're a little cut off because, but this is my mother. Her name was Luz Maria Santos Fabian, and this is my father, and his name was Salutiano Santos Hernandez. My father worked in the sugar field, and my mother was a young housekeeper and homemaker. And this is me and my two brothers. So you can see, I came ready. I came ready to do something. I am an immigrant to the United States. I came here in 1976 with my two brothers, Frank and Eddie. And now my brother Eddie has passed away, and he's in the ancestor realm. And my brother Frank and I are here, and he's doing his own offerings of contribution to this land of North America, which the native people call Turtle Island. I'm going to stop sharing here. And so I want to just give you that breath of who I am, because I would like for you to take a moment and reflect about who you are and what has shaped you. What are your ancestors, if you knew them, or even if you didn't know them, you could also just tap into their energy. And let's just take a moment and ground ourselves in our own heritage so that we can come together with all of the gifts that our heritage brings. So just take a moment, and if you can help me, Jack, if you have a bell nearby or anything, you can ring it in about 2 minutes. So just take a moment, and if it helps you to close your eyes, please feel free to do that. Whatever makes you comfortable. So allowing yourself to just connect to your breath. And if you like to invite any of your healthy ancestors to join us.
Awesome. Okay.
And regardless of where you're coming from, if you know the people, the original settlers of the land in which you sit, please take a moment and acknowledge them. Thank you, Jack. When I received this invitation, I was excited to join and to be part of this, primarily because from what I understand, you're part of a spiritual community, or all of you are spiritual leaders in your own right. And given where we are today, I think we have a particular role to play, a really important role to play. And that role is to really help us evolve as a society, as a country, as a nation, and as a world. There's, Jack was mentioning that she sees me in all these different spaces, and I do move in a lot of different spaces. But I am getting more and more clear that I need to really focus on my own healing practice, so that I can really help us to heal as a nation and as a world community. I want to focus today on speaking about North America. Even though I traveled from the Caribbean, I really want to talk about North America because North America has its own particular destiny. When people came here to settle this country from North America, they came with their own hopes and dreams and aspirations and trauma. Okay? And they encountered people who were already living on this land and on this country. And they perpetrated and transferred a lot of that trauma onto those people. I'm talking about the indigenous people of this land. In addition to that, they were also wanting to survive, and they wanted to raise their children and to have aspirations. And what happened, then they participated in the enslavement and the stealing of other people and brought them here and forced them into slavery. And then more and more people kept being abused, and more trauma kept getting transferred. So consequently, we're living in a time where now we're beginning to uncover, for a lot of people, this is new information. For a lot of people, it isn't. We know the history. A lot of people know the history of this country, and a lot of people don't. But we do know, some of us know, that the trauma, when it gets transferred onto another, we inhabit it, and the trauma gets to also be transferred genetically. It's in our blood, it's in our cells, it's in our bodies. Right? And as we continue to do the work to spiritual awakening, we have to heal that trauma. So it's very interesting right now that we're finding ourselves in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of an awakening and a reckoning. So when we were looking at the title being Spiritual Power of Being an Anti-Racist. Let's talk about the first part. What does it mean to be an anti-racist? Racism is a social construct. It's not real. It's made up. It hinges on the belief that one race is superior to another. That's not true. When you look at even the Genome Project and geneticists, they will tell us that we're actually very like 99.03% alike. There's no one race that is superior to another. There's been a lot of data and a lot of research. And I use quotes because it's false belief, right? But there's a lot of data to say that this group is smarter, this group is more athletic, this group is this group is that. But ultimately, what that's trying to do is to have us think that we're different in a way that one is more human than the other. It's a process of dehumanizing people. So racism is a process of dehumanizing people. What does it mean to be an anti-racist? Simply stated, that you do not believe that one group has superiority over another. Trauma. Trauma is that incident that happens and occurs that restricts our capacity to be fully whole. Now, everyone can experience trauma, and everyone pretty much has, right? Whether it's intergenerational, meaning like one group of people, like the Jews, who's had to endure the Holocaust and carrying that trauma intergenerationally. But it's not just the Jews, right? You have also the Germans who were witnessing the horror occurring and had to somewhat cut themselves off in order not to feel the horror that created, right? So we have that. It happens to a lot of groups. And we carry this as part of intergenerational trauma. But here, right now, what we're seeing a lot of is also the racialized trauma. And that racialized trauma is simply by the color of your skin, you're afraid that you will be hurt. Okay? Simply by the color of your skin. So we're swimming in this soup of intergenerational trauma, racialized trauma, and having this hypervigilance, constant response to the stimuli, like what happened with George Floyd. That was triggering memories of racialized trauma, of the lynching in this country, right? And then we have it being broadcast on television for days and weeks, months on end. So that when you are looking at this and you know representation matters, that as young people, when we see someone that looks like us, we interpret that that could be us, right? So all of a sudden you have a group of people looking at this happening and being traumatized and re-traumatized. At the same time, you have a group of people wanting to distance themselves from it. This is too too horrible. I am not part of that, right? I'm not part of that. And then other group of people just like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. I do not want to see that. So that's why we're also seeing this movement of what people of talking about critical race theory. What is critical race theory? First of all, most of the critical race theory is within the law profession, right? But at its essence, it's really about teaching the accurate history of the United States. But you have this surge of people like just ready to die to say, you're not teaching the history of this country because that's making white people feel bad. A history not worth looking at is a history that will get repeated. So our spiritual practice is about being able to develop the capacity, the inner capacity, to be able to be with discomfort, to be able to be with our mind, and to be able to go to that place where we can see that we are beyond the immediate, what is in front of you, that we are actually spiritual being having human experience, as some people like to say. So that's why it is critically important that we, as spiritual leaders, do our work to increase our own capacity to be with our own discomfort, to look at the ways that being in this culture of white supremacy, right? That has this whole idea of white supremacy, how that has seeped into our bones. It's almost like it's just a fish. If we're swimming in the water, we might think we're not in the water, but we are in the water. White supremacy has seeped into all of us. Whether you're black, white, brown, or any color, it seeps into, because that is what's been cultivated in here in this North America. So we need to do the work of healing that, healing our internalized inferiority. If you're, person of color, if you're a woman, we could talk about that too later, but in terms of the way patriarchy has seeped in also, but we're going to stick mostly to race here. Internalized superiority shows up even when you yourself might come from a class that you feel like you have some self-esteem issues around your class differences. You still can have white superiority. It shows up as internalized racism and internalized inferiority in people of color. Why? Because when you have a whole nation that have been sending you those messages that you are inferior, that your life does not matter, that you will not amount to much, that you're less intelligent. When you have a whole system, I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about a system that's been set up where you're not being shown in the books, where the narratives on any story that the evil person is black, the bad witch is black, the thief is black, the thug is black. When you have a whole system that's been cultivating that, it's really hard to keep up your self-esteem. So we need to do the work. We need to do our healing work so that when we are in the presence with others, people know that we're not feeling intimidated or afraid or shutting down, pulling away, all of the ways that the body communicates that I don't like you. Right? All of that, we need to do that work so that we can be open and let the spirit of this land, of North America, come through us and heal our relationship with each other and with this planet. My personal belief is that right now the planet is giving us a wake-up call. And that when I think about the planet and I think about us hurling through space in this beautiful, beautiful ball that is intelligent and that it has its own aspirations for its own evolution, we are either going to collaborate or we will not be here. And that is just my personal belief. On that note, I think I've probably said a lot of things that are provocative, or maybe you're there with me. So please, let's open this up and let's have a conversation. Thanks. Thank you.
When you say that we're going to collaborate or we're not going to be here, how optimistic are you? Do you see signs of our collaboration, or are we like still going in the wrong direction? And how bad will it have to get before we realize what we have to do? And will it be too late then?
I see signs of collaboration. I mean, I think that there's going to be, let's just say, I myself right now, Rick, and you know, I've been dealing with the after effect of COVID, right? So right now, I'm preparing to die. But we all should be preparing to die anyway, right? But I am preparing to die, and what's being asked of me right now is, for this time that I'm here, how do I want to live? And part of the way that I feel that I'm being called to live is to more deeply collaborate with the earth. So I see hope. If that's coming to me, it's not just coming to me, it's coming to many, many, many of us. Our consciousness is evolving and we need to evolve with it. If not, we're too dense and we're just going to be used as compost. And that's okay, because that's okay. But I do see some hope.
Satyani, would you like to come in next?
Yes, please. Hi, Jack.
Hi.
So first of all, I just wanted to thank Jack and Rick for inviting Victoria. And Victoria, me gusta mi hermana. I don't speak Spanish. I'm from Harlem, so I picked up a little bit. I just wanted to thank all of the people that I've named for naming this reality, which we also know is part of a delusion and illusion. This has been something that, of course, I've looked at in my own person as a person of color and someone who meditates and someone who embraces a non-dual perspective of being, of reality. Knowing, once again, as you said, there is no race, or as I say, there's only one race, the human race. and that all of this other mess we collectively believed into existence, or we were brainwashed and hypnotized into believing into existence, is so harmful. And so my aspiration has been for all people to recognize this, and knowing that seeing through the delusion is our life's work as human beings, recognizing the aware presence that is our true essence. So first of all, I was just so delighted to see your face here, because I'm going to tell you the truth. I mean, you probably have recognized this. There have been very few brown and black faces that I've seen in these non-dual communities. I would say possibly due to lack of access, due to lack of exposure, and also when we have experienced these daily, lifelong, intergenerational traumas, there's a strong clinging to that identity. Black is beautiful. Yes, it is beautiful. And so are all the expressions of human beingness. The one that I struggle with is seeing the beauty in the white supremacists. I do struggle with that. I really do. And knowing that aware being, that innate loving essence is in them too, even though it's hiding within the delusion. And so my aspiration and my struggle is to share these introspective contemplative practices that lead us to a conscious awareness of who we truly are, especially for people who've been traumatized, especially for people of color, who may sometimes feel that, well, if we say that race is a delusion, then we're bypassing, you're not down, you're not appreciating the beauty of your African culture or whatever. So I struggle with how to communicate the beauty that goes beyond physical and mental limitations. How to invite people to dip their toe into that. Yeah.
Gracias. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, my sister. Very early on, I would get in trouble by saying that we're all one. We're all one and we're all connected. And then I started really peeling back why that was, right? And it was primarily because people who have been so pained, oftentimes would hear that as a way of not acknowledging their pain, right? So I gotten better at acknowledging that having a racialized body in this society comes with a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. And I get it. And walking this planet as a Black woman, as a dark Black woman, can be really painful because there's so much projection, that gets put on me as as growing up as a child, she's loose. She's too mouthy. She's too this, just as a child, right? And then acknowledging that, and at the same time say, but I do know where we're going. And where we're going is to acknowledge and realize that we're all connected and that we're all one. So there's both. And this is where we have to also develop the capacity to be able to hold the nuance. And there is, it took a while, right? It's also a developmental stage, right? Because it took a while for me to be able to develop the knowledge and to develop nuances and be able to hold the subtle, right? There was a time where I was like, Black is beautiful. You know? And that was my own way of fighting back, kind of like, you're oppressing me, you know, but I didn't have the words, right? So just like, you know, I'd be in the street marching, you know, because that was the way that I could express the pain of being oppressed. So it'll take some time, and that's why being a spiritual teacher is so important, because it's if I did not have access to the spiritual teachers that I had, I wasn't going to be able to develop the nuances that I have right now, right? So compassion for the journey and for where we are. In terms of white supremacists and white supremacists, you know, I've been really working with developing compassion for where they are and realizing that a lot of the people that came to this country came here fleeting. You know, they came here fleeting an oppressor. You know, they came here looking for spiritual freedom. Most of the people that came here were of the exploited class. They were of the not owning class. The owning class in Europe did not come to America. The owning class in Europe stayed put in Europe, financing the boats. You know, the poor class, most of the people that came here were the poor class, right? So that is still in their genes, is still in their lineage, right? And I want to try to deal with the compassion. I want to try to understand. I want to, but it's not going to be when you have your foot in my neck. As I forget who said that, right? But he said, you know, I'm not going to support your liberation when you have your foot in my neck. So let's do the work so you can get your foot off my neck, and then we can have this conversation, right? So it's a both end. Yeah. Thank you so much, sister.
Peter, you can unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted. Hi, Victoria.
Hello, Peter.
I'm speaking to you from the grieving indigenous land of Canada. Kania Kiha Ka is Mohawk unceded territory for Montreal, Quebec. And my heart rejoices in the beauty of this land that the indigenous people sensed and brought into their spirituality. I want to talk to you about a couple of things. One is my partner. My partner is so good at being with the French Canadians that are here, that settled into this land from France, and on the whole, no, I got to be careful, and are somewhat racist, Islamophobic, the whole list goes on. But my partner, she intelligently treats them with respect and anyways, all to say that her angry husband is constantly working at copying her and trying to copy her behavior. Of course, you know, it's been so helpful. It's been so helpful, the whole non-dual trip with Jack to and to incorporate that perspective so that I'm standing from there, and you know, and all the practices and exercises that Jack's given us in her book, for example, The Spiritual Rebel, you know, and it's an ongoing process, you know, but you know, that I have to tell you that the first thing that comes is, as you know, Nadine, that's my partner, she can listen to a comic from South Carolina, you know, and I just can't listen to her because, I mean, the whole audience is white, and it's about, jokes about her husband going to the grocery store and getting the wrong things for her. Just, you know, I have to be so careful that I want to say, you know, I want to get judgmental, and so I just, anyways, I don't want to quite leave it at that. I want to add one more factor into all of this, and that is to say that we have a premier here in Quebec of the province who says there's no Islamophobia, that there's no racism, and yet they're the French Canadian are the first to say how racist the English Canada is towards them. So it's quite a complicated issue up here, and it's so interesting. When I start to talk to you like this, it's so interesting how I know how the English have been racist towards the French Canadian. So it helps me a little to be compassionate towards them. So thank you for being here, and I'm quite interested in your response.
Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing and just really feeling into the edges of all of that you're trying to disentangle. One of the pieces that I heard in what you were sharing is this piece around respecting someone, even if what they're sharing is different than what you believe. And I think that we've gotten to a point where it feels like if we even respect someone when they're sharing a different viewpoint, that somehow it means that we consent or are approving of their actions and behaviors and thoughts. And so I think it's really important for us to get really clear that simply because you and I are in dialogue, or I'm listening to what you have to share, and I respect you as a person, as a human being on this planet, does not mean that I consent or that I approve of what you're saying. And that's really important, because I think this was part of what's happening, at least here in North America, in terms of being able to have discourse. The discourse has broken down because, and that's part of the reason. So we need to begin to figure out how to have discourse. And it seems like your wife is a good modeling for you. So I heard you saying that as well. But I also am hearing you saying that seeing the tension between the French and the English speaking is also giving you an avenue into being able to see how having different identity or marginalized identity and superior identity, how the power dynamic plays out. And that's giving you an understanding into seeing how maybe like race relation is also how it plays out. So the step further, I think, for all of us is to get in touch with your rage, is to investigate the feeling. And not from an intellectual place, but from a felt sense place, right? Is to really go into where's that anger coming from? How is it showing up? What does it taste like? Really get into it, because the thing is that oftentimes we are encouraged not to feel our anger and to dismiss our anger, or to shove away our anger, or to eat it away, or shop it away, or have a drink. You know, all of those ways that we try to like not meet our anger. And I personally believe that anger is a healthy emotion. It's what we do with it. It's what we do with it. So investigate your anger, sit with your anger, and then see what the anger wants you to do. Because sometimes if we don't sit with those feelings, those heavy, I forget to talk about like heavy emotions, or like really, you know, if we don't sit with them, they'll just continue to come up and continue to come up until they burn us. So please take time, Peter, and be with your anger. Yeah, thank you.
Annie, I've put the
Okay.
microphone towards you, and just because there's a line of us with our hands raised, if we can be as concise as we can. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Hola, Victoria, ¿qué tal?
All right.
I
Yeah.
hablo un poco de español. I grew up in Latin America part-time, and I also spent about 3.5 years in Guadeloupe, the French West Indies.
Mhm.
And that was a very beautiful experience. And I was a minority there. So that was interesting. But I was also an American. There were very few, so I was sort of in my own slot, so to speak. But it was a very beautiful experience. But I just want to tell you that I really appreciate you tying in spiritual power, spiritual evolution with this healing and looking at our own trauma. And I would say, and also I've been giving thought recently to really be having the patience and the space to listen to somebody with very different views. And the power of that just by the mere listening. And just one last comment, I do have people that I'm close to, I mean, in terms of family, that they do hold certain white supremacist views. They would never cop to that, but they do. I can feel it. And the tendency I've noticed is it seems to be based on a lot of fear.
Yeah.
And fear is very contracting. I just see that as one of the maybe causal aspects of the more fear you have, the more incapable you are to see the larger view. So you tying in the earth and racial issues in this country and the need to heal the earth and each other through our own spiritual evolution, I really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this piece around fear, definitely. You know, and this goes back again with the compassion. There's been in this country, although in the last election, what just happened in the last election, there was a survey that came out which showed that a lot of the people that participated in January 6th event were not people who classified themselves as economically insecure. The reality is that in this country, there's been more and more accumulation of wealth by a very small group of people. And that most of the middle class have lost ground, and people who were still in the poor class, you know, like in the poorer class, are under tremendous pressure, economic pressure, and that we're losing the ability to be able to provide just an economic well-being in this country, that people are having more and more economic pressure. And all of that actually does create a certain amount of insecurity and fear, right? And when we are being told that the reason why we're losing our economic vitality is because those people, is because of those people. When we perpetrate that narrative, those people will get attacked. Hate crimes in this country have increased. We also see that a lot of people are being fed, and unfortunately, there's some groups and some politicians that take advantage of fear and fear mongering as a way of maintaining control. And that's unfortunate, but that's, you know, that's a political game. If I can make you afraid and I can show you a shadow, and in that shadow you think you see X person of color, but it's really your own shadow, right? It's a way of manipulating. There's a playbook. There's a playbook about how to manipulate a population, and not only that, but you know, when I was in graduate school and I was studying Latin American and Caribbean studies, one of the ways that authoritarian regimes control their population and control the country was by not educating the population. So fund education, and you have a population that's more easily manipulated. You know, don't fund bridges and roads and schools and hospital if your money is tied to another interest that's international and global in scope. So there's a lot that's happening that's about really pinning people here against each other and continuing to instill fear as a way of maintaining control for economic gains. So that's one thing. The other piece I would say, though, Annie, is that just to bring in awareness, right? I have to also understand the places in which I hold privileges, right? So as a Dominican who was able to immigrate to the United States, I have a blue passport. I have an American passport. So when I travel the world, which with this pandemic, you know, not much, but it's one of my favorite things to do, is to travel. I have the power that comes with being an American citizen with a blue passport. So when you go to these other countries, even though you're the minority in that case, you're still coming with a whole lot of US power, right? So I really want us to just wanted to bring that up, and not to deny your experience, but to just an opportunity to learn right here together. Thank you.
Hi, Victoria. I'm Catherine, and everybody here. My organization, the International Association for the Study of Dreams, my home organization, is taking the issue of diversity very seriously under our recent president, last 2 years. And the entire board of directors has undergone a diversity training under Victor Lee Lewis and Patty Dye, which has been really wonderful. And one of the key things that I got out of that training was an understanding of whiteness. And that I've had like a lot of circumstances where I've tried to understand what it might be like to be Black or to be Asian or to be, you know, some other. And this really put the focus on the water I'm swimming in. I love that quote that you brought in there. And that brought that to my awareness of the privilege, the invisible privilege that I, as a white woman, white person, have in this country. But one of the things that I was curious about is if you have thoughts. So we have done this training. We have a diversity committee. We have our last conference. We had many voices of color. We had many people that we specifically invited in to our conference. And I'm just like as the sister Satyani so beautifully said earlier, many of these places have very few colored faces. And I'm wondering if you have other thoughts about bringing in of how to make our spaces, including like I have smaller groups I run as well, how to make these spaces more inclusive and more welcoming to people of color.
You know, thank you for doing that work. It's understanding whiteness for white people is critical, right? It's really critical. And I know that Robin DiAngelo, I don't know if you heard of her, but you know, she gets a lot of flack from the right. She gets a lot of flack, and lately she's been also getting a little bit of it from the left. And the flack is like, here's this white woman and she's making, you know, money and she's training and all this stuff, you know. But I personally don't know of another white woman that has spent as much energy and time educating herself and undoing the harm that's been done by white supremacy. And also like being so vulnerable, right? Because the thing is, we're like toddlers right now trying to figure this out. If someone thinks that they like, oh, I am so enlightened, I know all this stuff already around racism, run away, run from that person. This is not your person. You know, it's like we're all just like trying to figure this out together because it's so hurtful. It's been so damaging, and we're so wounded, and also we're gonna make mistakes. Right? We're going to make mistakes, and we have to be able to have enough capacity to be able to do the repair, right? That comes. So when you start really going into this understanding whiteness, you're going to, one realizes, right, how controlled we've been. How even our education system has been a process of conditioning, you know, that, and then you start questioning free will, you know. So it's a deep process. It's a deep process. And that's why I connected to spiritual power, right? Because it's really is a deep level of this conditioning. So in terms of what to do to make more spaces inclusive, right? I would say, do your work. Just continue to do your work. Once you do your work, then you realize when the opportunity will present itself. When you can invite people in without them feeling tokenized. And just, I would say, here's a trick though, don't invite just one. You know, don't invite just two, you know, like make it so this person feels like, oh, I can see myself here, right? That's fine. The other piece is do consultancy, pay people for their time. You know, people of color are exhausted. Black folks are exhausted. There's a few that have made it up to a certain platform, and everybody's using them. So, right? And then it's just like, and then they're exhausted, and they're like, okay, and they're exhausted, and they're like, okay, here's feast or famine, right? So, so I would say that, and then just look around your space. Look, you know, start analyzing everything from your high school all the way up to where you are now. Is there someone in your own background that maybe you need to go back to and have a conversation, if they want it? Like you could just send them, you know, like connect with them and say, you know, I'm interested in reconnecting with you and letting you know the person I am today. And if that is of interest, please let me know. Some people of color be like, you know what, I can't right now. I'm dealing with a pandemic. I'm dealing with, you know, all the stuff, my voting rights getting taken away. I am dealing with a lot right now. But it's also, for me, it's been one of the most healing experiences to find other white people who I know have my back, who I know are like really there, like doing their own work, and are meeting me, like ready to meet me, and also to help to take care of me, whatever happens in my life. Someone I don't have to perform for, someone I don't have to be like try to be perfect for, someone who I can show up with all my mess and all my mispronunciations and my poor spelling and all, all of that, and they still love me unconditionally. So, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, next.
Susan?
Yes, hello. Victoria, I'm so pleased to hear you and so inspired by what you've had to say. Starting from seeing your beautiful little town of Cruz Verde in the Dominican Republic. I spent most of my adult life in Puerto Rico and did my training as a psychologist in Puerto Rico, and married into a Puerto Rican family. And so I have a great love and appreciation of the Caribbean, for one thing. My question to you, I'd be so interested in hearing more how you work with trauma. I've been reading that book of Resmaa Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands, and that's I find it very beautiful. I'd love to hear what you do and how, and I think I have heard the way that you've been answering people, how you do work, but I'd love to hear a little bit more specifically working with trauma.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that question. Yeah, Resmaa is amazing, and he's doing beautiful work on somatic abolitionist. The other person that's doing really great work, and someone, okay, let me back up. So I actually started doing trauma learning work with someone from Germany. His name was Johannes Schmidt, and he, excuse me, let me just adjust my chair. And he was doing embodiment practices at the time through the Aptitude Academy in Germany. He was coming to the US at the time. I don't think he's doing that right now, but it was really powerful. And that's when I really started to sense into like beyond the body, right? Because the thing about trauma is that it constricts the bodies in all different ways, and it keeps the energy stuck in those places. And there's, for me, at least in my practice and the way that I needed to approach that, because I came from a very abused childhood, that I had to go beyond the body into stillness, to then be able to come back and go into the body and explore it and create enough safety to be able to stay within the body. And so my journey of that embodiment practices have come from everything from very early on. Before Johannes, I was actually at the Kripalu Center in Lenox, Massachusetts, doing a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, spiritual practices. And then from there, I found, Sobonfu. And so there was a lot of ritual practices, a lot of communal practice. And the way that Sobonfu worked with grief, which is, which was an expression of trauma for me, it was in community. So having community practices that I didn't have to go into a lot of the stories. It was more about just being witnessed and being supported, and kind of the community calling me back. So this has to be a callback. And I know that I think it's, forgetting the name of that, there's a group that do a lot of practice with veterans that have coming back from the war with PSD, post-traumatic syndrome. They would do that, a lot of the calling back as part of you split off, right? So I did that a lot with Sobonfu. And then after that, I ended up doing the work with Johannes. Then I ended up meeting Judith Blackstone. And if you haven't worked with Judith Blackstone, if you don't know her work, actually here's one of her book. It's called Trauma in the Unbound Body. And you could go to her website. She is one of the most skillful healer I have come across. But of course, I also have been ready, because I did all this other work, to meet her. And then I've been working with Judith for about 8 years now. And in there is like, she really creates a container and helps you to create a container to be able to investigate the trauma on a very, at a cellular level in a very deliberate way. And there's a series of exercises and meditative practices. You know, some of them are 10 minutes, some of them are 25 minutes, where you're investigating very, very focused. She also has it on a video and audio and Sound True, that you can do it on your own pace. And so she basically operationalized a lot of the work that I saw, like Peter Levine and Van der Klerk and Resmaa do. But honestly, for me, that practice is just, it's just it, because I've been able to, thank you, Rick. I've been able to experience all of the universe in that practice by investigating my own body. So thanks for asking, Susan.
Victoria, my question, I think, is multifaceted, but I'm most drawn to the term anti-racism. That is part of the title here. And you know, one way to look at it is, well, if we're going to be anti something, aren't we kind of fueling the whole split, the divide? That is the root, one of the root causes of the issues here in our cultures. So, like, what do you feel is the role? Like, if I can hear the diagnostic, and I've learned so much around how you see the cultural context. And then there's the visionary part, and they tend to be two different energies. And so where is the role of spiritual leadership? And I would question, like, being anti something, isn't there another position where there is a spiritual potency? And for me, there is not being pro something or anti something, but engaging a perspective that perhaps is fresh.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's a language issue. It's a language issue. I think, you know, like I said, we're kind of fumbling through this right now, and the language kind of keeps evolving as we continue to discover and find new territory. And so right now, like, that's a language that's being used sort of as like a short handle to understand that we're talking about not being a racist, you know? And so it's really about finding the next language. And I think the more people question, like, what could be that language be? Then once that emerges to our consciousness, and we'll use that, right? Because it's constantly evolving. But right now, honestly, I cannot tell you what that word is, because I don't know, right? I don't know. Not racist, pro-humanity, or, you know, not pro, not anti, like, what is the brilliant word? I'm hoping that someone could do some deep meditation. I like that. Free. Yes, do some, yeah, you know what? That's close to freedom. I mean, I've been using freedom a lot. I'm also hearing some people talking about liberation a lot. I've been, you know, like, if you're liberated, then you're not shackled, right? And by a past that's, you know, hurtful. So yeah, love. Yes, love is definitely another one. So you just have to keep, like, brainstorming these amazing words, and one will stick. Justice is another one that people use, you know, a lot. Or yeah, but equity doesn't capture it, you know, like all of us being equal. So equity, yeah, I think it's just going to be a process of time. Okay. I think I see Phil.
Am I on? Hi, Victoria. I want to thank you for being with us. I'm one of the board members of ASI, and first I want to say I'm very pleased to hear you struggle with the language, because I've been around long enough to see the language around social and political issues evolve and often get misconstrued, like as we've seen with defund the police and other things. We have to really be very careful and precise with our language. Speaking of which, I'm glad Jack raised the issue of the term anti-racism, because I wanted to let everyone know that we, those of us on the board, have received a few complaints, I should say, about the topic of this webinar. And we've encouraged those who objected to it to join us and voice their critique to you. And they chose not to. Jack mentioned one who was concerned about the term anti-racism. And then I'm going to quote from another message we got without identifying the person who sent it. But that person said that, I'll use the gender neutral term, they objected because they felt that this is a political, I'm going to quote now, this is a political issue where one political party is using the race card to push against the other party. It's politically polarized topic. I have seen the division CRT creates, CRT meaning critical race theory. And it creates, he or she said it creates division, not unity, and therefore objects to our having the seminar. So I would love to hear your response to that and have it be a permanent part of the record, just, you know, so we address these concerns.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so let's, when I think that we have kind of segmented things so much in this country that you say, if you're speaking of this, you cannot speak of that. If you're speaking of this, you're not speaking of that. And that have served this purpose, but we really need to, I personally believe that we need to have a more subtle analysis that is actually taking the intersectional things into account. So this piece of like, this is a political issue is often used as a way of not talking about things that are like really important for the day-to-day life, right? So if speaking about the issues around race that impact my life and the way that I'm being treated in the world and the way that the people that look like me are being treated in the world is perceived as a political issue and therefore should not be spoken about, that is a way of dismissing, right? That's dismissive. And then when someone says using the race card, you see, that is a word, two words that's when put together is loaded with all kinds of insinuations, right? So Victoria's using the race card. If I'm using the race card, does that mean that what I have to share around race then becomes invalid? So I find that very interesting. Now, we can't really have unity without knowing the history that impacts our coming together. We can't have unity if you don't see me as a full human being. We really cannot have unity if we have a whole system that is painting people that look like me and me as the evil one, the villain, the one that just should not be counted. Let me throw in there Black Lives Matter, just for a dash of measure here. This whole piece around like Black Lives Matters. When people say Black Lives Matter, were they saying that white people didn't matter? No. It was a saying to say, Black people matter. Black people matter. Do not discount us. Do not throw us away. Stop jailing us at disproportionate levels. We also require political representation. We require education. We also, all of those things, that's what Black Lives Matter says. So I am really, really sorry that this person chose not to be here and that they perceived that whenever I speak about these issues, I am not in unity. But honestly, I can't participate any longer in a conversation or in a way where I am not fully seen. And being Black in America right now is huge. Let me find the right word, because you're just not even the word. The word is, if I cannot tell you how being Black in this country right now, I feel, if you think that I am being divisive, then I don't know what hope we have. I really don't. I am doing my best to understand white people, to understand the suffering, the pain, and all of that history. And I really need you to do the same. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Yeah.
Alan, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Great.
Sure. Well, first off, I want to really thank you, Victoria, for this presentation. And I'm really grateful to ASI for having the courage to have in the den of spirituality, spiritual leaders to bring up the subject of anti-racism. And I deeply appreciate how you shared with us how it's in our bones, it's in our cells, this white supremacy. And so much of spiritual practice doesn't take us there. So the kinds of spiritual practices that you mentioned, where we go into the cellular, where we go into the somatic, where we go into the kinesthetic, I think that's really vital and essential. And I have to enter into the anti-dialogue that Jack brought up. I thought it would come up when I saw the title, and because as spiritual people, we're very anti-anti. It's like anti is really a bad thing. So what can I say about that? I mean, this issue, as much as anything I know, brings to awareness the complexity and the subtlety and the paradox of non-duality and duality, or diversity for that matter, and how to hold that, how to be with that, how to honor the sense of identity that people have as human beings, while being open to the one that all is, without getting lost in being colorblind. which is a delusion itself. So the one thing that came to my mind that might be helpful in this is to recognize that in our bodies, we have what are called antibodies. These are some part of the miracle of this creation that we live in that protects us and in a way fights aspects of nature that are harmful to the organism. And racism is a virus of the mind that is harmful to the body of humanity and is so destructive. And if we have antibodies for that, I'm all for it. I'm all for that anti.
Wow, Alan, can I borrow some of that? Thank you. Antibodies, yes.
Victoria, we have 4 minutes left, and a couple of private messages have come to me around another theme, and I just want to put it in front of you if you have a few words or a few pointers towards it around the oppression between the binary gender structure. You were talking about the oppression of women, and we'll get to that later. It just came up as a theme, but because a few private messages came in, I want to just
and someone put a long chat there that I also am not able to read right now. But let me just say that if you can understand, if you have any kind of marginalized identity or an identity in which you have felt oppressed, whether it's class, whether it's gender, whether it's sexuality, if you have any grouping, any part of yourself, age, ableism, any identity that you have felt any kind of marginalization around, if you investigate that, it gives you an entryway into understanding, racism. And vice versa. If you do the work of being an anti-racist and understanding how racism has perpetrated in this country and globally in terms of white supremacy, if you can really understand that, then it gives you a more of an opening and understanding into how to deal with gender discrimination, how to deal with class discrimination. So that's what I was trying to say very quickly, shorthand, and say I wanted to come back to it. So that's what I meant. This conversation was focused on race, but once you get one, then it's easier to understand the other. I feel like I'm pretty an able-bodied person, except recently with my health a little bit. But because I understand the way that I'm being oppressed around race, it gives me more of an understanding and a compassion towards people who are oppressed around their identity as a disabled person. Yeah.
Thank you so much for reweaving the broader tapestry of where we see the same model replicating with under different wording, but it's the same fundamental issues. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'd just like to thank you with all my heart personally, and from the ASI.
Before we go, Jack, I want to hear what Sister say.
Jenny,
do you have your hand up, or was that a mistake?
Okay, thank you. I was trying to type it in the chat because I was respecting the time. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
You have 1 minute.
Sorry, I was trying to type it in the chat to respect the time. But just to say very quickly that I appreciate Jay and a couple of gentlemen that followed Jack. I work with someone named Jay, I apologize, who raised the issue of questioning anti-racism and other, aspects of our society surrounding that. And this was a term created by attorneys to name the systematic racism of the American legal system, which I call the American injustice system. It is not a spiritual term, okay? And so I mean, I've been struggling with this, as I mentioned earlier, seeing the, what shall we call it? Sitting in aware presence transcends all of that. And then you come out of meditation and you're dealing with, I'm not even gonna say what's, you know, the George Floyd incidents, that wasn't the first time and it's not the last time. And this is a reality that people of color are navigating, even while trying to be whole, be free. And so there's some of us in American society who are privileged to bypass this. It affects everyone, but it doesn't create the same danger to our very physical existence for lighter complected members of the human family. And so you have to name something to deal with it. Whatever the delusion is, you've got to name it, you've got to see it, you've got to feel it in your body so you can release it. So I hope I didn't go on too long.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you so much, sister. Jack, do you want to take us out?
Sure. Yes, huge gratitude to you, Victoria, and for everybody for showing up today. I'm overjoyed by the bravery and the courage to we got to take responsibility for ourselves, because that's where the buck stops. How can we follow you, Victoria? How can we keep up? Where do we go from here?
Well, I will send you, Jack, we're doing actually a couple of events coming up. That's the Center for Healing and Liberation at Commonweal. And I'll send you the information so you can share it with folks. We have 2 events. One is going to be on doing racism in the body, doing the body practices, and also doing some work with Robin DiAngelo. And then in October, which is October 30th, we have a panel with Resma Leticia Nieto, who's amazing. If you don't know who she is, look her up. She's just amazing. And Robin DiAngelo, and then another a man from Edwin from South Africa, and Nova, who's doing a lot of work on anti-racism work in the UK, and really bringing the global perspective of this. And that's going to be donation-based October 30th. So I'll send you more information later.
Super, and we'll send that out in our next newsletter, so that people can follow up. And I encourage people to keep going on ourselves and take responsibility for our own path. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Catch you downriver.